Hello. Go ahead and fade this out. Oh, you guys have no idea how much of a pain in the ass it is to get live streaming shit set up. Holy cow. But we're here now. We're here and we're ready to party. Okay. Oh. Go ahead and move over to the next scene. Hello. It is time. It is time for the schediphillia follow-up. I said I'd do it. We had comments for it. And now we're here after like 3 weeks of me fucking around with software and shit. We're ready to go. Finally. Okay. Why am I live streaming this? That's probably the first question. Being off the cuff will make it easier for me to present this information, hopefully in a clean way that makes a little bit more sense. I've never done live streaming before, so I thought it'd be a good skill set to pick up as well along the way. What I've done is I've broken this down into a bunch of different sections that we're going to go over. Hopefully it won't be too long. I'll do it live. If we get any questions, if anyone actually watches this and we get questions, I'll try to answer them as I go. But yeah, so that's the plan. And then afterwards I'll cut it up into a video and hopefully release that as like a condensed version of it so that we can try to hit all the big points that I wanted to talk about. For those of you that weren't paying attention to the comments, which is probably everyone, I had a few people ask about why the video stopped where it did. I didn't go super in depth into a bunch of different concepts like around the idea of schediphillia because I just pretty much it's a very big topic to cover. So I wanted to make sure I did it justice. So it took a few weeks off. Well, it didn't take a few weeks off. It took a few weeks to get everything together and kind of organize my thoughts into this thing. I've also had people ask before. This is Obsidian. It's just a note-taking software I use. It's nice. Use it a lot. In fact, real quick, I'm going to pause for just a second and check my stream. Make sure the audio is going okay. One sec. Cool. All right. Everything sounds good. Okay. So that's the whole plan here. Everybody get a grip. Maybe we'll bring the jazz music back if it's popular. But let's go and start off. Okay. So schediphillia video. What was it about? Well, the thrust of the video was exploring this phenomena of people falling in love with pictures. It's kind of weird, kind of interesting to me because it's one of these sort of pop psych weirdo things that happen. One of the problems with the video is that schediphillia, fictophilia, the whole like waifu culture is a niche of a niche of a niche. And the way that I found to describe this would be like you have the phenomena of waifus and schediphilias, and then within that is within the broad selection of anime broadly, and then that would be within like the field of pop media or just popular media more generally, and then we get further and further out until you actually get to society. So there's a lot of interlocking things. And before we go any further, I wanted to introduce the concept of an overdetermined phenomena, which is kind of a big word, but it's something that comes up a lot in economics, but I don't think normal people talk about it a lot. An example that I came up with this was like, why are weebs awkward, right? Like that's sort of the stereotypical thing with people who are super into anime. And to actually line out why that is the case takes a lot of analysis because there are a lot of things that could be true about that. So maybe it's that people who are awkward are attracted to anime, right? It could be the case that the anime doesn't actually do anything to them. It's that this sort of media is more easily consumed by awkward people, or it just attracts that type of person. That arrow could point the other way. It could be the case that you can be a somewhat normal person, engage with anime, and then maybe through a few of the examples I thought of where the fact that it's translated, the fact that it's sort of a caricaturized version of interpersonal interactions could actually reinforce the awkwardness of the people that are already there. So it's kind of hard to tell which way that arrow goes. Another one could be that like the language barrier makes strange speech patterns. We already know this to be the case, right? There's a lot of moments. I think of like the Dark Souls series as one where it's translated from Japanese and the various translations could give you radically different interpretations of what the actual characters are saying. So that's an example of that. But the big overarching point here is that it's overdetermined in the sense that there's 500 reasons this thing could be the way it is, and it's impossible really to isolate one of them and say like this is the reason why this is happening. If you're an ideologue, that's what you would be doing, right? You would go out of your way and say like, oh, you can apply this to almost anything. If you find anyone who thinks that like if they could change this one thing, then everything would fall into place, that's sort of what's happening. They're looking at an overdetermined phenomena and they're picking one, usually whatever their favorite idea is, and then just running with that. And that's what they decide is the most important thing ever. You find this with like, the one that comes to mind just off the top of my head is like gold bugs, people who are trying to push gold, buying gold, holding gold, this sort of thing. They can build these really arcane understandings of monetary theory, and if everybody used gold, it would just take it all away. And like that's sort of an example of that. But you see it everywhere. Pretty much anyone with one big bugbear, generally that's what they'll be doing. Before we get into the actual discussion of the topic broadly, I wanted to go over a few of the resources I've used. Bowling Alone, that's Robert Putnam, 2001. You can see it's kind of the oldest book here. That is, I would say, probably the seminal book on the breakdown of American social structure. I guess I should explain that first. Schediphillia plays into a lot of social ails within our society that we, I think we all kind of have a feeling of this, that like people are pulling away from each other and this sort of thing. And I think this schediphillia is a runoff of that. So that's how I'm approaching this. I'm coming at this from a very broad analysis of sort of American society, and then diving, like drilling down to schediphillia, and then hopefully showing some of what I think are the runoffs of this big sort of shift we've seen. Bowling Alone was sort of the first book to really identify this degradation. It came out 2001. It is perhaps one of the densest books I've ever read. It's like 400 pages-ish, but every other sentence has a citation in it. So it's not an easy read. It's also pretty dry. But if you want like the overarching like last 60 years of decline that have led up to more or less our generation's place here, that would be the book to start with. Number 2, this is the one that I'm going to be focusing on, The Coddling of the American Mind. This is by Jonathan Haidt, Greg Lukianoff. I think a lot of the patterns that this book identify, you can see the extreme versions of it present in these sort of weird little internet communities you find everywhere. For instance, the AI waifu communities, which is the thing that I got pointed to probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago by one of the guys in the Discord. A lot of the social contagions that make that sort of thing possible are very well identified in all of these books, but in particular in The Coddling of the American Mind. It gives a very strong timeline of where things were, how they changed. They put the year of the big change around 2014, 2015. So that's that book's role. It'll give us a timeline to run down, and we're going to be focusing on that one. Men Without Work is one that I read a while ago. This one feels a bit more like a political book, more so than like an analysis. This one feels much more along the lines of like old man yelling at clouds, as opposed to like analyzing these long trends in society. It feels a lot more kind of like these damn kids. And then there's so many articles and op-eds and stuff about the friendship recession, the sex recession, the abstinence only is one, and you go through, and most of these are focused on the younger generations. We'll get into that a little later. But these are 2 Atlantic articles I liked a lot. I'll probably link these in the description once this thing becomes a VOD. But these are the resources we're going to be focusing on mostly. And if I'm referencing numbers or something, they're probably coming from one of these books or one of those Atlantic articles. Okay, so theory of the case. What is going on, right? That's what we're trying to answer here. Gen Z is going to be the focus of this, just so everyone's aware. I'm 25. I'm about as old as you can be and be considered Gen Z. I'm a boomer, zoomer, a zoomber. I'm an old zoomer. So, what is Jonathan Haidt saying in Coddling of the American Mind? His main contention is that kids born after 1995 are different. They're fundamentally different. And what he points at to prove this is that they delay all of their major life achievements. This is everything from driver's licenses to how much they drink, when they start dating, when they start working, when they move out of home, these sorts of things. All of these start getting pushed back starting in 95, and then they stay that way, which is a little unsettling. He also ties this into a lot of social movements during that time. Number one, more testing. You're seeing a lot of the The No Child Left Behind policies introduce a lot more standardized testing across the United States. You also see a lot less free time. If you've heard the term helicopter parenting, this is when it starts coming into its own and being its real force on society. Anti-bullying is a big push during this time. It sounds weird to say, but it actually wasn't. Bullying wasn't seen as much of a problem before the 90s. It was just sort of seen as a part of society. Whereas today, obviously, at least where I went to school, there was a zero tolerance thing. So like if you got in a fight, everyone got expelled, which was ridiculous. But that was a part of the sort of social milieu that these kids grew up in. Another big change that he points out is the fact that these kids born in 95, they would have started getting social media at 13. Not just social media, but mobile phones also become a huge part of society, of these people's lives. And this will have deleterious effects that we'll get into a little bit later. Haidt, also I should mention, he does a lot of lectures about this book. This Atlantic article is called Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid. This is a very good breakdown of the last decade, if you're interested in that. If you want to just get kind of the top level of the coddling of the American mind without committing to actually reading the thing, this UBC Phil initiative is the best one I've seen. It's about an hour and some change. There's some Q&A. He's a really good speaker. He's one of these pop psych guys, so he's pretty good at explaining his ideas. So if you want an introduction or go a little bit deeper than what I do here, that's probably where I'd start. This is also a video. I don't know why this is not pulling, but I'll put it in the description afterwards. Okay. So where were we? All right. Kids born after 1995 are fundamentally different. A few of the mental, I don't want to say conditions, but like mental, let's say consistencies that come up in this generation. Number one, disagreement is threat. That's the idea that within a democratic society, one of the things you're built on is the idea that you can disagree with people and not hate them. This concept starts getting eroded with this generation and then continues to be eroded. So if you disagree with somebody, like for instance, if you're let's say you're a Democrat and you're pro-choice or something. If a Republican tells you that they're pro-life and they think abortion's a murder, ideally in the proper democratic society, you would say, yeah, that's your opinion, I disagree with you, and then you move on. More and more, you're starting to see the moral loading of these concepts onto political opponents, where it's not that they disagree with you or that they have a legitimate but different view, it's that they're bad people with bad intentions. So this is how you get to situations where like one of the rhetorical flourishes you'll see a lot is that like Republicans want to kill kids, or Republicans want to or like every time you see a school shooting, you'll hear something like that. That's an example of moral loading, where it's not just a disagreement, it's that they're actually evil. Of course, the other side of that would be like Republicans saying something like, "Oh, well, Democrats want to kill babies," or Democrats want crime in the streets, or whatever. You know, it's not that they disagree with you about the intentions; it's that they actually just have bad ends, right? Another concept that gets pushed a lot during this time is that words are violence, right? I have my own problems with this. I could probably do a whole soliloquy on why this is a terrible thing to put into people's heads, but this is something that gets perpetuated. You see it a lot on college campuses. You see it a lot in some of the more social sciences. You see this idea that sort of the conflation of physical violence with rhetorical violence, or with not even rhetorical violence, just sort of strong disagreement. And then another thing that Haidt points to is that throughout most of these kids' lives, they've been in a situation where there was a higher authority that could resolve problems. So that would be, for instance, if you get in an argument with somebody, these kids are much more likely to go to a teacher or a parent or something like this to resolve an issue. And just because this came to my mind when I was reading this, this is the only time I've ever heard of this happening, but on my campus, we had an undergrad's mom call a professor about his grades. And I'm just going to tell you guys, because I know from my demographics, most of you are my age or younger. If you're in college, for the love of God, do not do this. Never, 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 never let your parents do the adult stuff for you, because I can tell you that will follow you around. If you're on a campus, believe me, I'm a grad student. I talk to professors a lot. They know whose parents are like that, and that will put a black ball on you. It is not something you want to get. It's not something you want to get pinned with. I just saw a comment come in. The grave matter and pertains to the being of life. Yeah, there's arguments both sides of it. The point I was just making is that there's the moral loading of it's not just a disagreement. It's not just another perspective. It's that they're actually evil. They're actually pushing for bad ends. That's the mental jump that happens. Okay. Haidt in Coddling of the American Mind, his point is that between 2014 and 2015, all of these kids go to college. If you want some reference, people born in 96 at that point are 18. They're just entering college. Immediately at this time, mental disorders spike on these kids going to campus, and it's incredibly clear. And I mean, every data you see all over the country, mental health centers are filling up. They need to double and triple the staff to keep up with the surge of these kids. And what's interesting about this is that it's not. It doesn't use the term genetic, but that's one of the terms for it. It's not genetic mental disorders. It's not like schizophrenia or these things you inherit from previous generations. Those aren't what's increasing. It's mood disorders. That'd be like anxiety, depression, things like this. Generally, these aren't things you inherit. They are heritable, meaning that, like, let's say if your mom had depression, the likelihood of you having depressive tendencies is higher, but it's not something that you just get. It's not something that happens to you. It's a thing that exists in you and then is activated by your surroundings. These spike with these people. And he goes into much deeper analysis of this. Lukianoff, the second author of this, he compares it to cognitive behavioral therapy. He ties it to, so in CBT, it's this type of, it's a type of counseling and a type of therapy that you can undergo. It's to correct for negative thought patterns. And what he says is that all of the patterns that were instilled in these kids during their schooling and up and through when they got to college are pretty much the absolute opposite of what you would do if you want like healthy thought patterns as described by CBT. It's an interesting part of the book. I'm not sure I totally buy it, but it is an interesting concept. Haidt goes on in his talks and in the book to focus on girls because girls are suffering the most. And it's not even close. It's everything that is going wrong with Gen Z in terms of how they interact with society and how they interact with each other is going more wrong for girls. And one of the things I wanted to point out, I don't even really remember this because I'm kind of too young for it, but it's something that I've had explained to me is that social networks, so we say social media today, and to us, that's just what it's called. I'm going to sit up real quick. We just call it social media. But something to remember is that it didn't start off as social media. It started off as social networks. And originally, Facebook, the function of Facebook was not to have you consume things on there. It was to, not rendezvous, what am I looking at? RSVP to different parties. So it was a tool that you would use to connect with people in the real world. So it wasn't about going to this website and spending time on the website. It was about going on the website to connect with people off of the website. Over the course of several years, you see the introduction of things like the like button and in particular the retweet function on Twitter. Both of these things at the time seemed pretty trivial, but fundamentally alter the way that these organizations operate. Because then it goes from you using this place as a tool to do things in the real world to the goal being to keep you on this website, consuming and doing things here. And of course, since you're interacting with it relatively frequently, these websites also are able to build incredibly accurate marketing profiles of you. This is what their business model eventually becomes with the advertisements and how strongly targeting their ad regimes are. And that's the transition from social networks over into social media, where it's more about consuming on platform as opposed to building connections off platform. And then there are a few extra points I wanted to go over. This is just kind of an aside. Trigger warnings, I just wanted to tell you guys, those don't work. At least all of the research that I've read on these, if anything, let me say it like this, at best, they do nothing. But they seem not to... So the idea behind trigger warnings would be this, right? If you have an experience that's incredibly traumatic, the hope is that I tell you that I'm going to talk about something triggering, and this allows you to steel yourself and prepare for this. In reality, what it seems to do is just like amp up the anxiety, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. Like if we're in a conversation and I intend to punch you at some point, if we start off the conversation and I don't tell you, then I just hit you out of nowhere, you're like, hey, what the fuck? Whereas if I tell you, I'm going to punch you right in the face, but you're not going to know when, that's a little bit more foreboding, and you could see how that would make someone a little bit more anxious. So, and all the research I've seen seems to suggest that trigger warnings at best don't do nothing, but most of the time just enhance traumatic responses and sort of amplify people's anxiety around those traumatic responses. So just, yeah, if you're in a lecture or whatever and somebody gives a trigger warning, I'm not telling you to like stand up and be like, hey, did you know that that's actually bad? Don't do that. But I just mean it's a good thing to keep in your head when you see these things going around, and to try to, when you're in a position of power, to do such a thing to kind of represent the other half of that argument. And then the other one was that phones plus social media seemed to drive this a lot, because a lot of these people are getting into, because, the phone makes it 24 hours as opposed to just, logging onto a computer. Okay, on to the next half. So this is what Haidt focuses on. God save the queens. Social media is like a weapon of mass destruction for women's social dynamics. And I'm going to say this stuff real quick, and then we'll go back and explain it. Male-to-male contests are generally backed up with the threat of violence. This has been the case forever. It's generally true now. It continues to be true. Women-to-women contests aren't. Generally, they're built on relational power, social structure, social standing, attacks on character. This is how you see combative female competition, generally speaking. And an example of this, just because I feel like that might be a little vague, one of the things I put here is like, I'm really worried about Sarah. She's been running around with so many different boys. This is the kind of attack that women would level. This is a traditional feminine structure attack. It's one, plausibly deniable, because you're not actually saying anything in particular. You're just sort of insinuating some sort of negative character aspect. And this is how you see a lot of female competition. This article in particular is one of the craziest things I've ever read. It's from the Wall Street Journal. Pretty much the summary of it is that Facebook knew that Instagram was incredibly toxic to young women, and they preserved it anyway. Kept it going, in fact, enhanced it in a lot of ways. And obviously not good, but Instagram in particular affects women. Facebook also was negative, but the invention of Instagram was that it made it a visual medium. And this is something that has a lot of serious implications for the dynamic that plays out. One of the things that we end up finding out is that visual comparison is one of the strongest ways to compare yourself to others. It's something that's very important to people. So like, if you feel that you're unattractive compared to somebody else, that has a much harsher impact on you than like character differences. So if you think someone's like a more moral person than you, that doesn't tend to bother us nearly as much as if you think someone's much prettier than you. And Instagram is built around sharing images and showing yourself in sort of manufactured situations, which is in particular hits women because a lot of their social ties and social structures are built around these relational frameworks. Social media, and in particular phones, remove all the boundaries of attack, right? Used to, if you had a problem with a girl, say you're a teenage girl in high school or something, and you have a problem with a girl, at worst, she can kind of do damage to you in the high school, right? She can go after your friend groups, she can say mean things to your face, she can, mess up your life there. The difference now with social media is that 24/7, girls are posting images of themselves, showing themselves, going to parties, being in places, looking beautiful, doing whatever, and it doesn't stop. You can DM each other 24/7. You can attack people 24/7. You can do it privately with deniability, just like the attack that I put up just a second ago. You can launch these 24/7 all the time. The pot never stops stirring. And that is, it would do in anybody, to be blunt, but especially the structures that a lot of women interact with day to day make them particularly susceptible to this type of enhanced attack, where it's pinging off of them all the time. We talk about like FOMO. Imagine FOMO back in the 80s or something. You might hear about a party that happened somewhere over the weekend, but in the modern day, immediately in live time that you were not invited and that you were not there. And you will see, every minute of this party uploaded online in HD, the one that you are not invited to, especially if you had some sort of falling out or something. It just enhances everything that's negative about these structures. It's incredibly toxic. And this article goes more into depth about how Facebook actually knew this and continue to do it anyway. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that Haidt focuses on this, rightfully so, because it affects women far more so. But something is that it's not just a degradation in mental health that we're seeing, but we're seeing real, actual impacts, like effectuated impacts on people, meaning that we don't just see women attempting suicide more, but we see more suicide, more cutting, more burning is another one that people do. They'll burn the tips of their fingers and things like this. Actual, real physical damage is increased in this environment, and it's incredibly toxic. And there's not a lot of ways, at least I don't know a lot of ways of fixing it, but this is, it's a real problem, and it's real in the sense that it's not just making people sad, it's making them hate themselves. And then I wanted to touch on suicide here. It's something that you often see women attempt suicide more, and there is going to be some bandwagoning type effect, right? Because suicide, things like 13 Reasons Why up here, it sort of romanticizes the idea of suicide. You're going to see more people sort of attempting suicide for the clout, I guess is like what you say, or just, as a cry for help. But something you'll often hear, and you'll hear it a lot from like very far right or very masculine people, you'll say like, oh, well, women attempt more, but men commit more. And I don't really get what the argument is there. I guess the idea is that like men mean it more, and they kind of use this as like a weapon against, like as if women only do it for attention. That's not the case. And then number two, that's like not something to brag about. Like ideally, nobody would be even attempting suicide, right? Like that's what we would hope for. But you get these people who sort of, I don't know. They treat it like men are more serious about it, which, just FYI, men act more rashly in every sense of the word. They're more violent, they're more active, they're more likely to lash out, they're more emotional than women. That's something that people don't really like to hear. You'll hear, the idea of like the stoic man or whatever, but most of the time these guys who talk about stoicism, they just kind of act as though anger isn't an emotion, which it is. So like if you see videos like like what's like the stereotypical male reaction? It's like, oh, I'm just so mad, I'm throwing shit at the wall. Like that's an emotional reaction. That's someone being possessed by their emotions. But people don't really want to acknowledge that. Anyway, so point being, men are more rash. That's part of the reason that nearly all of the violent criminals are men. They act more rash when they're more emotionally charged than women. That's what testosterone does. It makes you more reactive. I gotta take a drink real quick. Hold on. Talking too much. Okay. Notes for this section. These are generalities when I'm talking about like the ways that people compete, and the, like I said, like male on male contests are generally backed up by the threat of violence. That's obviously not true for everyone, but generally it is. Women on women contests are generally through relational powers, but obviously not all of them exact this way. Obviously, some people act violent in different ways. Doesn't just. This is my CMA. This is my covering my ass note. And then the other note I wanted to make, this is just something that I always try to bring up. Something that's interesting is that the social power that women wield, I think often gets degraded by people who pretend to be more traditional. But the social power they wield gave women substantial power. Even when de jure they had no power, de facto they were still incredibly powerful. And something that I've often said is I don't think I could write it, and I don't know anyone who probably could, but I think there's probably a great novel somewhere in that dynamic, like maybe think of like a Victorian woman exerting her power on the world via these relationships. So it's sort of like a Game of Thronesy sort of thing. I don't know. To me, I think that'd be a really interesting book that somebody could probably read, or maybe a movie or something. But it has been the case forever that women exert their power through these sort of more subversive qualitative roles. If you read about the rule of Queen Elizabeth, the first one, not the one that just died, but one of the original one. One of the things she would do is that she would court people, and she would lead these guys on for a long time, and the whole time she's getting like political concessions and making Britain more powerful and gaining power through this way, and then she just cut them loose when they were done. And it's one of these things that's just it's a cool dynamic. Anyway, yeah. Somebody write that, please. I'll read it and do a review on it or something. Okay, so now the other half of the equation, the side that Haidt doesn't focus on in most of his presentation, the boys. These are Lost Boys from Peter Pan. Throwback to that. Something that I always want to mention as well is that Peter Pan is not a hero. This is something that I think we sort of miss because he's the main character in the movie, and we sort of assume that he's the one that we're supposed to be rooting for. the whole point of that story is that what he is doing is just as bad as what Hook is doing. It's just a different kind of bad. There's a reason we call it Peter Pan syndrome whenever guys like refuse to grow up. It's not a positive thing. He's not a good guy. Anyway, Haidt focuses on girls, rightfully so, because the impact is much larger on him. My contention is that the only reason that the impact on women is more easily observed at this point is because the boys haven't really hit that wall yet. And again, here I write warning, conjecture. This is just my ideas. This is not, I don't have any papers for this. I'm not citing anything. I'm just throwing some facts out there and then connecting some dots. Number one, the age with the highest suicide rate for men is middle age. That'd be 40 through 60. The proposed reason for this is that this is the point in life where life stressors begin to peak. This is when, if you're going to get into major legal, financial, or relational problems, they're all going to start settling in there. Meaning that like usually this is the time when people are starting to get divorced. This is around the time that people's financial situations are beginning to fall apart if they're going to. And then also this is a time when your career starts to solidify. At this point, you're sort of past the age of going out and dating people. I don't know if you know many single 40-year-olds. That's not really a scene. Maybe later on it will be, but at least right now it's not a thing. This is generally when your career is sort of settling in. You're becoming who you are going to be for most of your life. And the thing I want to point out is that what do you think's going to happen when you take a cadre of boys who have delayed all of their maturity markers, i.e., got driver's licenses later, started working later, most of them dropped out of education? That's something that needs to be talked about as well. Men are failing out of higher education at incredible rates. Women are absolutely dominating in that. But what happens when you take these guys who have, in no small proportion, have fallen short in a lot of ways, in a lot of markers that our society values? What happens when you take these guys and then you put them in middle age, and this is when it really starts to settle in? My conjecture is that I would expect these numbers to get far, far worse within the next few years, specifically among deaths of despair is the term that we use in economics. That would be everything from addiction to receivership. Receivership is being on welfare, getting money from the government to exist, as opposed to going out and making money. Depression and suicide. I expect all of these to get far, far worse for boys specifically of a certain class. This would be the children of the middle class, the sons of the middle class who have failed to achieve or get to the middle class. I would expect these to get far, far worse in the following decades. And I think the reason we haven't seen that yet is because we just haven't gotten to that age, which is a little foreboding, but that's my theory on that. And then to quickly touch on the higher education, this is something that's kind of incredible that I don't see many people talking about. Within the last 50-ish years, there's a huge push to get women into higher ed. This is something that is incredibly important. We can be as edgy as we want. You can go and listen to all the gurus you want who tell you, oh, you don't need college degree. You can make money being a plumber or something. And you can. You can absolutely. I got a friend that makes ungodly amounts of money being a welder, but you can do it. But if you are middle class, the most sure shot way of guaranteeing you a middle class existence, there are a few steps. Number one, graduate high school. Number two, don't have kids before marriage. Number three, get a college degree. This pretty much guarantees you, I won't say guarantees, but we're talking high 90% rate of being middle class yourself, middle class or greater. And just for reference, if you're in the middle class, most people in the United States spend at least a decade of their life, or spend at least a year of their life in the 1%. So like we're talking about a high turnover rate bracket of people. So his point being, if you're going to do nothing else and you don't really know what you want to do, graduate high school, don't have kids before marriage, and get a college degree, and you're pretty much set, at least in the United States and pretty much everywhere else as well. So it's incredibly important that women are succeeding in school, and it seems to be that men are falling behind quite remarkably, not just in college, although this is where I'm at, so I'm most aware of it here. I want to say that it's approaching 60-40 in the country. I should probably just have pulled up stats here. Maybe we'll do that after. It's approaching 60-40 in the country to female to male graduates, which has all kinds of problems beyond the fact that men aren't graduating. We would nobody. Whenever the female empowerment and female education movement got started, nobody ever assumed that if you actually made the playing level that women would actually just outdo men. That wasn't even a conception at the time. And now, I'm not saying, obviously I'm not super up to date on the numbers or why this is happening, et cetera, but it wouldn't surprise me if within the next few years we have to seriously start talking about ways of improving men's lot within education, because it's getting a little crazy at this point how much men are falling behind, not only in lower education but also higher education, and in several specific disciplines. Medicine in particular, I think, is being just dominated by women. They're doing phenomenal there. And then you have disciplines like engineering, which are still male dominated, and there's trade-offs. We can get further into it some other time, but that's just a big point that nobody ever talks about this. I don't know why. It's a huge success. It's a massive success in our society that we just never talk about. Okay, next section. Knock-ons. These are the effects that come out of this series of terrible things that we're talking about. I think what I would observe, or what I'm observing, is that there are already market solutions to these people catering to these sort of half-baked ideas that a lot of these people run around with as a byproduct of their upbringing, as a byproduct of how they've been schooled. And I divided it into genders, and I tried to make it a little more balanced. We'll start off over here with the red pill space. If you guys have ever heard anything about this, this is a very interesting thing to me. Whenever I want to say in high school, PUA was the acronym. This is pickup artist. Nowadays, it's more the red pill or alpha male or yada yada. You've heard of them. We got all these guys. This is Sneeko, the lost boy. Fresh and Fit. This is a big red pill podcast group. This is Rollo Tomasi, very comedic human being. The grandfather of the red pill. He's written like fucking 9 books about this. It's ridiculous. And then this is Top G himself, Bugatti. Bugatti. I can't do the fucking thing. Anyway, I wanted to critique some of this. I wanted to go into this because I think the mass of people that they're appealing to are these people we're talking about. These young men who have been brought up in a world that they don't really understand and have these sort of weird ideas that have gotten instilled in them via a lot of the indoctrination that we've seen up until this point. And I think the people who are serving them are these guys, or at least they're serving one type of person, one type of male in this group. I'm gonna take a drink real quick. My main contention with this entire genre of influencer is that most of them have like a 14-year-old's understanding of masculinity. That being that they seem to, it feels like what a dude who's never been a manly man thinks a manly man is. One of the things that makes me laugh is that they constantly talk about restraint, working out, control, keep frame, push yourself away, keep women in their place or whatever. Unless it has anything to do with getting pussy, then the restraint's gone. Then you can throw that shit in the garbage. Fuck as many women as you possibly can. Get between those legs. That's what the goal is. Which is weird if you're actually interested in becoming masculine. And a point I wanted to make is that masculinity is not just power for power's sake. We know this. This is every story you have ever heard. Almost always. Think of any villain in any show. Almost always the reason they're evil is because they're pursuing power for no other reason than to have power and to exert it. Like off the top of my head, one of the, like Femto or Griffith in Berserk, like what makes him evil? Well, he does a lot of evil shit, but really what he's doing, he's acquiring power through bad means and then exerting that power to be powerful. Power is not an end. And masculinity, I think more so than power itself, is the ability to restrain that sort of foundational drive. And these red pill guys just don't ever mention that. Another thing, these guys constantly call themselves traditional. There is nothing traditional about anything that these guys do. I put there, traditional means me doing whatever the fuck I want because women ain't shit. That seems to be their central motivating force. And I find it a little gross, but beyond that, it doesn't work, right? Like, what is a traditional relationship? Well, the man goes out and makes money, and the woman is a sex toy that stays home and cleans. I'm going to tell you, as somebody who grew up in the South, that is not the traditional power structure within a family. Generally speaking, you get the sort of de facto thing, which is that generally within these traditional structures, the man will have the final say, but it's not because he's more important than the woman. It's because the woman has a domain and the man has a domain, and then they overlap. And that's what like the traditional marriage, when you think about like white picket fence, 2.5 kids, white picket fence, fucking suburb lifestyle. That's what it's actually pursuing there. And what I would tell you, I wasn't raised in a traditional household at all, so it's a little hard for me to describe. But what I would tell you is that the people I know within these traditional forms, I don't even know how to describe it. When you listen to the red pill guys talk, it's not like they don't treat women with any kind of respect. Everything that women do to them is less than, right? What are men? Well, men are strong. What are women? Well, they're dainty. They're weak, right? And you just run down the list of all the different forms that they take, and it's fundamentally non-traditional, because if you listen to them, the sort of adversarial relationship they seem to have with women is not traditional at all. That is absolutely not the case. And then number two, they denigrate everything effeminate. And I can tell you, I've never seen them do it. So just mea culpa, I've never seen them do it. But I can almost guarantee you they would absolutely shit on the idea of a guy being a stay-at-home dad and not having a career and doing sort of like the traditionally feminine stuff. Because their definition of masculinity is entirely centered around superficial things like wealth and power and, how many bitches you can get and this sort of thing. There's a really funny clip that I might pull up, or I might just cut it in whenever I cut this into a video, of Rollo Tomasi on a podcast being asked what a high value male is, because he is like a centerpiece of the red pill ideology is to become high value so that women will pursue you because women are, I don't know, like blood sucking leeches or something. And he can't define it. Like, he completely flounders. The dude just rolls all over the floor trying to figure out what his definition is. It's a hilarious clip, because remember, this is this guy. This guy's written like fucking 5 books about being high value, and he could not define it on the spot. Which, to me, obviously, if you're into the red pill or if you're into this stuff, it probably doesn't mean anything to you. To me, that says a lot. And then something else that says a lot about this movement and why I think it's probably on the way out is that even the Tates have started distancing themselves from this. Andrew Tate, I don't think, has come out against it. Maybe he has, but I remember reading just a while ago that Tristan Tate, which is the other brother, he called the red pill corny, I think, which is like hip talk for weird or shitty. And it makes sense to me that they're driving themselves away, because I'll tell you, I don't know a lot about the Tate brothers. I've read a few things by them. I've watched a few of their videos. What I'm going to tell you is that something that I absolutely believe about them is that they're some of the most competent pickup artists I've ever seen. They seem like the Tristan Tate guy in particular, not this one, the other one. He has a video, I don't know if it's still on YouTube, but he had a video describing how he emotionally manipulates women, which is obviously not a good thing, but the way he describes it, I can tell you from my experience, that guy knows what he's talking about. Like, I guarantee you that guy has slept with lots of women and he knows how to tell them what they want to hear. Whereas if you listen to these guys in particular, because I've watched 2 or 3 of their podcasts, I'm not going to say they don't ever get laid. I'm just going to say they've probably never had a relationship, because the way they talk about women and the way they talk about going about getting their traditional waifu is fucked in the head, I think is the term that I would use. Same with Sneeko. He just seems like a lost boy. But these two I've listened to because they're a really big red pill podcast, and I just the way they talk about dating and things is just absurd. If you have any actual real world experience, they just feel like caricatures of what, I don't know, poor people think like rich baller dudes are. Anyway, so even the Tates have started distancing themselves. I think this movement is on the way out. And something I wanted to pose to you guys, to any of the men listening, which is going to be most of you based on my demographics. If you've read To Kill a Mockingbird, if you haven't, you should. But if you haven't read To Kill a Mockingbird, what I ask you is Atticus Finch a high-value male? Because I don't think these red pill guys would say he is. Because he's not particularly important. He's not the best lawyer in the world. He's just the lawyer in this town. He does the right thing when it's not easy, which is good. But he doesn't have a lot of money. He doesn't have a lot of bitches. He's taking care of 2 kids, right? Like, he's kind of got all the L's that these guys would avoid. But what I would say is that the masculine thing about Atticus is the fact that he embraces this half of him that is not traditional, right? It's the fact that he does the right thing when it's not easy, that he stands up for somebody who nobody else is standing up for. That's what makes him masculine. That's what makes him high value, is the fact that he's appealing to some underlying moral structure that isn't just how many vaginas can I get my dick in, or how many stacks can I put in my bank. There's more to it. There's a chest there. There's something to hold on to. And that's an example of what I think a high-value male is, what an actual high-value male is, not like what a dude with, I don't know, fucking oversized Rolex thinks a high-value male is. Another example I would give is George Washington. Is George Washington a high-value male? He wasn't particularly wealthy. He was not particularly intelligent, especially among the founders. He was not particularly wealthy. And after the war, what did he do? He gave up power. He threw the power away. He could have become King Washington. He absolutely could have. King George, ironically enough. But he didn't. He walked away from it, and he went home to his kind of, he had a plantation, but it wasn't a huge plantation. It was kind of more of a farm. Mount Vernon wasn't, the envy of the world, and he just kind of returned to his normal life. I think these guys would say that that's not a high-value thing to do, that you should retain as much power as you can. If you win the revolution, you should become king because that's what you should be pursuing. I think that's what they would push for, because they have this sort of two-dimensional view of what makes somebody a high value. I think the thing that makes George Washington high value is that he rejects that form, is that he pushes against that there's an underlying moral that he's appealing to that isn't just how powerful he can be. That's where the value comes from. And then the Ben Shapiro point here is just because I forget where I saw this. I think it was Rollo or somebody else, but they said that Ben Shapiro is not a high-value male. I'm not a conservative. I disagree with Ben Shapiro on a lot of things, but what I'm going to tell you right now is that he's one of the most high-value males in the country, probably in the world. Number one, he's running one of the largest media empires in the country, period, bar none. Started it by himself with, I think, one other guy and some seed funding, and they've done incredibly well. They're pulling in hundreds of millions of dollars. So number one, he's got that. Number two, he's in a traditional Orthodox Jewish marriage, which means he dated one chick, they got married, they have 50 million kids or whatever. And then the other thing that I would point out is I saw an interview with Shapiro maybe 2 years ago that I think really underlines to me the thing that actually makes him high value. And I think his relationship is a good example of what I'm talking about when I say a traditional relationship. And it's edified by this one scene that I saw in this interview. And that's that Shapiro was talking about how he had been on Twitter more than he had been previously. And he recalled that his wife talked to him, and his wife told him that it was making him angry and kind of making him a stink to be around, and that he should lay off on it. And what'd Ben do? Well, he set a timer on his phone, and I don't remember the exact details of it, but he uses it for an hour and then he doesn't touch it the rest of the week or whatever. And that's the sort of relationship that is actually traditional. This is where the wife is not less than Ben. The wife is accentuating, improving, monitoring, pushing him forward, being the old saying, behind every great man is a great woman. That's what the wife is meant to be. That's what I think Ben Shapiro edified in that interview. That's what he demonstrated, is that there's different domains, because someone like Ben, who I would say is a high-value male, who's probably incredibly busy with all the stuff he does, probably isn't monitoring his emotional standing as well. This is, there's a reason that you get these people jumping off of fucking buildings on Wall Street. It's because men tend to not focus on their emotions until they're the only thing they can focus on. So that's an example of that sort of traditional dynamic being lived through. But then also, I think it demonstrates the value of it, and it shows that this sort of guy who, love him or hate him, he's a pretty important person, is living to his traditional values. And then I would also point out, because he mentions this all the time, his wife is a doctor, so she's pretty important herself. She's pretty competent and able woman herself, not just a homemaker. And then I go into here about all the different religion stuff these dudes talk about, because I don't know why, but a lot of these red pill guys have taken a weird turn where now they're hyper religious. They're becoming Muslims or Christians and stuff. I went down a whole rabbit hole here of polygyny, which is one man having several wives, and it's what would you say? It's history in Islam, because a lot of these guys will say that they're Muslim because you're allowed to have a harem in Islam, and they use this as a justification for them to sleep around with dozens of different chicks all the time, which is interesting, it's not convincing to me, at least, and I don't think it'd be convincing to your average Amon, but more than likely these guys have never seen the inside of a mosque anyway. But I ran down that rabbit hole, and I think the most honest interpretation of this is that at best it's debated in Islam as to whether this is an acceptable thing or not, but you'll often hear these guys talk about it, so I'll probably just link a few of these in the description instead of running down this whole rabbit hole of this, because we got to move on to the other half. The women, the girls, the queens. My throat is dying. Okay. The other half of the knock-ons of these previous sort of ailments that I was talking about is happening on the female side. And I think the best example of this is sort of the girl boss movement. Obviously the meme gaslight gatekeep girl boss, bro. But I just wanted to make a few passing points about this, because obviously I'm not a woman. I don't interact with these communities that much. I'm much more comfortable interacting with the male side of this, just because I have more experience with it. But a few points I wanted to touch on for the one woman that's going to see this recording. There is a difference between lifting non-traditional roles and saying that non-traditional roles are acceptable versus degrading the traditional roles. And I think a lot of the movement you see online in particular, I wouldn't say real life, real life people are just more reasonable, but online I think we've ventured into a lot more of just shitting on women who, want to be a stay-at-home mom or something, as opposed to just saying it's okay to not be. One of the big driving underlying factors of this is that I think in a lot of ways our society has made it more acceptable for women to go into traditionally masculine roles without allowing men to go into more traditional feminine roles. What do I mean by this? For instance, if a woman starts her own business and becomes, a businesswoman, or goes and works in, say, law or something, becomes a lawyer, this is her, living her full life, right? Being the liberated woman. However, I can almost guarantee you, at least in my experience, and it's mostly millennials in my experience, to be fair, most of these very successful women would never entertain the idea of being with a man who is less successful than them in business or in their private lives, like in this sort of thing. And the idea of going out specifically looking for a man to fulfill the traditionally effeminate role is not something that they would consider. I think this is changing, actually, a lot with Gen Z. If you look at some of the polling that's come through, it seems to be moving that direction. But it's something to think about while you're coming up, is what it is you're actually looking for, right? So if we say that it's okay for women to come into the workforce, and we're okay with that, then we also need to be okay with the idea that there are men who won't want to be in the workforce, right? There are men who will want to be stay-at-home dads, who will, maybe they work part-time as a teacher or something, and then that's sort of what they do. That should be just as acceptable as the sort of girl boss movement. But you don't see that. Nobody ever talks about that. That's something that and of course, I'm not agitating here. I'm not launching for a revolution or whatever, but just in your day-to-day life, think about this, notice it, sort of interact with this idea, play with it, see what you think. Again, like I said, many women I know who are very successful in business, I don't think they would ever entertain the idea of having a guy who makes less than them, or someone who isn't as educated, someone who only graduated high school, or someone who focuses on staying home. I think that's something we need to work on and think about a lot more. And then I'm just to lay my cards on the table, I'm not some radical feminist or whatever, but I have read my feminist theory, or at least a good amount of it. And a point I wanted to make, if you're a girl and you're listening to this, or if you're a man, it's probably good to think about as well. In my opinion, it seems like in the same way that the red pill constructs this sort of infantile understanding of what it means to be masculine and what it means to be a man, the modern, and I put it in air quotes here for a reason, the modern quote-unquote feminist defines the value of a woman strictly through their adherence to norms of masculinity, which is something that is unbelievable to me. Because if you think about it, what is it? Why is girl boss appealing? Why is girl boss appealing? Well, it goes against the traditional forms. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means they're acting like a man, right? They're doing manly things, which I don't care. There's nothing wrong with it. But what it is doing is that it's if you adopt the idea that this is how women should be, if in your head the liberated woman, the actualized woman, the woman being true to herself is the one who punches against the norms, then really what you're doing is you're adopting masculine forms as your standard. You're putting men as the norm, and then you're not saying that women are just as good as men. You're saying women can be just as good as men, or we can do this just as good as men, which is totally different. It totally goes against the entire point of all these people, of the women liberation movement, that it's okay to be a woman, that there are differences, that it's okay that those differences are there, that being different doesn't make you worse. That's something that is just totally abandoned in a lot of the discussion of these things, and it's something that drives me crazy because it's the entire point. The entire point is that it's not that women can be just as good as men or women can be men. It's that women are different than men and they're just as good. They can be business people. They can also be stay-at-home moms, just like men. Well, stay-at-home dads, but you know what I mean. I don't know how to have this conversation because it's not something that I engage with a lot, and I'm obviously not a woman, so it makes it a little awkward. But it's something that once you start noticing it, you start seeing it everywhere, and it drives me fucking crazy. And I don't know how to put it in words to where it doesn't sound like I'm like tisk-tisking at women for like trying to be businesswomen or whatever. But it's something that I think, like I said, it's something to throw around in your head and think about it. Why is it? Why is it that when we think about the actualized woman, it's like the girl boss businesswoman running things? It's like, well, because that really, what is that? That's the historical structure of what we think of a successful man as. Shouldn't we be thinking, like, why are we assuming that what makes men successful is the exact same thing that would make women successful? Why does that have to be the same? Why are we assuming that? It's something that bothers me, and I haven't really been able to put good words to it. Part of the reason I'm doing this live stream is because I don't have great like scripted like quips on it. There's not a lot of easy ways to like. There's no way to square this circle that easily. So this is just sort of my thoughts on paper. And then another phenomena, and I extend this into hookup culture as well. This is something that I can't tell you the number of. Because I'm not old, right? I'm 25, like I'm not that old, but I can't tell you the number of women I've run into where it's sad to me that it seems like what they're lacking is an adherence of relationships, right? Like it's relationships is what a lot of these women want. And when I say relationships, I mean multi-year relationships, like long-term committed things. But then I think our society broadly puts a huge emphasis on hookups. And I think that's a fundamentally masculine thing, right? Like that's what we think of. We think of like the you know, like the billionaire CEO dude hooking up with a new chick every weekend. This is very much a masculine thing. There's no reason for that to be the default. There's no reason for us to assume that this is what success looks like. And yet here, I think as a direct byproduct of the upbringing of a lot of these people, they're sort of I guess I was going to say mistakenly, but I don't know if it's a mistake, but they're sort of abdicating the idea that there could be another optimum, or the idea that there is something better than that. And I think that's tragic. That's something that we should really be talking about. And then, or thinking about. Maybe more thinking than talking, but one of the, yeah, anyway, that's enough. Another thing that I wanted to tie it into really quickly is this, with what I was talking about with the Lost Boys and the failing of men in a lot of higher education places ties into this phenomena that I've seen quite a bit, which is where are the good men at, right? You'll often see successful women saying things like this, and I don't know how we're going to go about changing this, but it needs to become acceptable for men to not be the breadwinners when women are in the workforce as well. And this is part of that problem, because where are the good men at? Well, they're might not be in college. So is it okay for women to marry men who don't have as much achievement as them, say in education or in business or in their abilities or these sorts of things? Because I can tell you right now, it definitely doesn't feel that way, or at least to me. I just among the women I know, I don't think that would be acceptable. And that's going to be a big problem, because I think it's going to get worse. Like I said, I think these trends are only going to continue. So it's something that we really need to think about operating with. And that's more or less what I wanted to talk about today. You can see that this is a presentation that has spanned quite a bit. I actually don't know how long I've been going. Hopefully not too long. But before I peace out, are there any burning questions that we can put in the chat? I'll probably just be looking around for a little bit, trying to think about how I want to chop this thing up. Been talking for way too long. Social media was supplementary to an existing social life and has now become a replacement for social life. That's absolutely true, I think. It's really sad, but I think a lot of people have actually just supplanted their personal lives with social media, which is definitely not healthy. I think these comments are pretty old. I'm not seeing anything right now. I'll probably hang out in the chat for a little bit. If you guys want to talk about anything, I'll be on Discord as well. I'm going to chop this thing up, turn it into a video, hopefully cut out all the ums and ahs and awkward things, and then I think next video is about Oshinoko, which will be interesting because that is a pretty cool anime. I don't think it's going to be about the story though. I think I'm going to talk about their animation style because nobody's talking about that, and it's pretty damn cool. The way they converted that from the manga over to the anime, I think, is super duper interesting. But yeah, my throat's falling apart now. So, oh, Ada had a question. Go ahead. Anime version of Ted K. Yeah, I don't know where I got that, but yeah, I thought it was pretty amusing. It's a funny little picture. It's definitely not the normal kind of live stream. This is really just meant for a just me explicating my ideas here, trying to say a few things before because if you haven't seen the original video, which I guess if you clicked on it randomly, I had a video about schediphillia, which is this phenomena of people falling in love with pictures. And a lot of people had asked me, I can actually just scroll back up to this image real quick. I had some people asking about like what I thought about it, or like how we might go about fixing this. And that is a difficult question that has a lot of things tied into it, which is which isn't the kind of thing that lends itself to a very clean script, right? There's a lot of open ends here. There's a lot of broken, like, well, how do you fix this? Well, I don't know, and just like shrug and keep going, which is not a very enticing thing for a scripted video where you're doing like, you know, documentary style discussions of things. So that's why I did this live stream, because hopefully it can be a bit more freewheeling. Hopefully it comes off a bit more, how would you say, a bit relaxed, a bit, you know, more touch and go, as opposed to me demagoguing about something for too long. Although maybe I just come across like that always anyway. Ugh. I do not usually talk for this long. My throat is just falling apart. Ask your questions, come on. Ada? I guess it doesn't really matter if I hang out if it's a live stream, huh? I can just cut this off on the VOD. Tell you what. Oh, where'd my music go? I closed my jazz. Not my jazz. What do you think of the archetypes in anime that are bleeding into reality? And how women, and sometimes men, act in order to gain attention and or relationships? I think what you're asking is like people taking like taking archetypes from anime and then using that to get relationships. I'm not really sure that works. I mean that like what I'm imagining is somebody who like watches an anime and thinks like, oh, this is what a manly man looks like. I feel like you would just end up looking like this dog if you did that. I kind of get what you're saying. What do I think of that? I would think it would not be a very successful strategy, is what I would honestly think about it. I guess if you're asking, do people do that? I think some people do, and I don't think it's very successful, because I think it ends up coming across really weird. I will say something, actually this just made me think of this. I have a few friends, not girlfriends, what am I looking for? Female friends, whatever. I got a few female friends, and they read a lot of romance novels, and I think for them, something that happens is that they kind of start expecting normal real life relationships to be like romance novels, which is obviously sort of setting yourself up for failure, because most men are not, you know, I don't know, 6'8" and jacked to the gills and incredibly strong and super dominant and things like this. I think it's probably a bad thing broadly. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if I understand your question, but that's what I would say. I would say that if you are doing that, it's probably not going to work out well, and that the people who are doing that as much as they may have success, and maybe among other anime viewers that's an acceptable thing to do. But I think if you act like an anime character of any regard, you'll probably end up, I don't know, just coming across as kind of awkward, right? Like weird, because anime characters are pretty weird, man. Like they don't act like normal people. They don't talk like normal people. They're scripted, so they come across very dramatic, which is actually funny if you end up, if you ever get into Japanese itself. What you realize is that anime characters in Japanese speak like soap opera characters in English, which is interesting because it's not, you don't pick up on that when you don't speak the language, but you see it there. Michael, there's a small subsection of YouTubers that make videos on how to be like that. Oh Lord, do I have to go and look at this? I might pull this up. Hold on. You mean like they teach people how to act like anime characters? That is super odd. It's like a dating school kind of thing. I'm meaning like when taking the ideas of tsundere and yandere archetypes, I've seen a lot of public around me, though I just got out of high school this year, so maybe it's just youth cringe. That is always an option of anything you see in high school. It could always be. Youth cringe is almost always a pretty good assumption of why things are the way they are. But that's super interesting, actually. You're seeing people act like, do you mean that like they're looking at it and they're like trying to build their personality around like tsunderes and yanderes and stuff? Yandere is a little sketchy, my man. Don't they murder people? But interesting. So it's like it's kind of like how people will like it's like, you know, the noir detectives where they're like, this is my city, but it's my city, or like it's a gross city, but it's my city, and like, you know, you get like the fedora wearing cringe lords or whatever. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's that sort of thing, like people projecting that as like their archetype of how they hold themselves in public. If I was going to say that, what I would think, okay, I think I get it more now, actually. So what I would say is that I think probably what that is more of a sign of an underdeveloped personality, where like these people, if they're doing this, they probably don't have super well developed personalities themselves, or they're not into similar things. Or how would I say? So what I would say is that there is a kind of person who, robbed of development, will go to people that they either think are cool or sexy or interesting, and then they will just kind of glom onto that personality and make that themselves. What I would tell you is that usually what happens to those people is they do that for a little while, and then something slips or something breaks, or they move on to another person, because fundamentally it's not who they are, and that will drive you crazy eventually, trying to be someone you're not. I've not met anyone of I'm trying to think. Yeah, I've not met anyone past like 22, I guess, who I would say is like obviously aping somebody. I think eventually that's something that you just grow out of, but it's probably a part of development that you start sort of emulating characters you see and trying to just trying to be somebody else. Like, you know how kids will play? Like they'll play being a doctor, or play being a construction worker or whatever. It's probably just a part of development that like these people don't feel super comfortable in their own bodies, and so they're sort of adopting these alternate identities that they see in the media they consume, and then using that as a way to like, you know, it's like trying on clothes for them, and then maybe eventually through this they end up developing their own feelings of who they are and their own idea of what they find to be an acceptable personality structure. That's what I would say. That was a really long answer to say that they're aping other people because they don't have their own personalities. Kind of get acting like anime characters thing, Gym Bros with guts, PFPs. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Kids back in the 60s absolutely were acting cringe, but we just don't have records of it. That is a rough part about being a kid these days, especially if you ever read about, there was this wild story a while ago, I'll see if I can find it, where this guy, oh shit, I'm gonna try to get the story off the top of my head. He had a Snapchat story in which like a white chick from some town used the N-word with the A, like the N-word with the A in the text of the Snapchat. And he held on to this until she got accepted into a college, and then he published it and got her canceled. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh my God, like even when I was growing up, I didn't have Snapchat, obviously. So it's like, it's so wild to me that like people are putting these things online, and then there are people out there that will use it maliciously, which I assume that doesn't happen for no reason. I bet there's some history there, like maybe they dated or something. I just remember being like, holy shit, like the idea of all these things being documented like that, like it really is, when you put stuff on the internet, it is kind of just there forever. And that was one of those stories to me that like I really don't understand this world anymore, because I couldn't imagine doing that, but two, I couldn't imagine really just like uploading anything like that, like me going to a party or whatever on social media. It's just so weird to me. But yeah, thanks for answering the question. Yeah, of course. Hopefully that helped out. I think that's about it. I don't know if the chat stays live. I guess I'll stay in the comments for a little bit afterwards, but I'm probably going to end the stream here. I got to head off to class here in a little bit. Thanks for sticking around. I think you two are the main viewers, so thanks for being here, Michael and Ada. And then I also had Chucky was here earlier as well. I'll chop this up probably in the next few days, turn it into a video, upload it, and then what did I say? Oshinoko next? Oshinoko, however you say it. Probably doing that next. Alrighty. Thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you